Hey guys, welcome to the weekly question video. If you like these question videos, leave this video a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you're not already. All of those things really do help out the channel. And if you want to dive deeper into the topic of domestic discipline, get bonus content, the best way to do that is over on Patreon. A link to our Patreon is down below. So in this week's video, I'm going to be tackling the question of, is this really consensual? I think that so many times when we are first starting to dive into the topic of domestic discipline, when we are trying to figure out what domestic discipline is, we're doing research, so many of the things that we can come across sound maybe not in alignment with what we want for our relationships. And sometimes we can kind of start to question, is this really consensual? Is this something that, especially on the taken in hand side, is this something that she really wants to be happening? Because so many conversations about domestic discipline specifically don't really cover consent and the consensual aspect of this relationship. So it's important to understand that when you are talking about domestic discipline, especially using physical discipline within your romantic relationship, you have to make sure that both people are on the same page. You have to make sure that you have a conversation, that you are in agreement, because we do have a choice. And it's important that when you're going into domestic discipline, that you make sure that this is a choice that you are both actively making, and that this is not something that one person is imposing on the other. And that can go either way. I think it's really important to recognize that even a head of household can be kind of talked into doing domestic discipline when that's not something that they maybe are super comfortable with. So you want to make sure that you're having conversations, that you're asking the right questions, and that you're both being honest to what you want from your relationship and what you are and are not willing to incorporate and experience and go through. Because domestic discipline done right is consensual. It is something that you get to choose as a head of household or as a taken in hand. It's something that you should have the ability to opt in or opt out. And anyone who is participating in domestic discipline, they are doing so because they want to. And if you are researching domestic discipline, if you are trying to figure out if this is something that will help your relationship, understand that you need to go into it with this attitude that this is your choice and that you really do want to participate in this, and try to figure out why. What is your motivation for wanting domestic discipline, and have your partner do the same, and try to find a common ground of like why you as a couple, as a unit, feel that this is beneficial to your relationship. And that is how you continue to have the motivation and the drive towards growth, is to be unified in your vision for your relationship and for why you are using domestic discipline within your relationship. Now, when Kona and I first started, part of us trying to figure out if this really was something that would work for us was having a trial period. We wanted to go into it eyes wide open, and the only way that we could do that was to have some experience to kind of base our decision on. And when I first brought it to Coda, we didn't have that experience. We didn't know what discipline was going to look like, how we would each respond to going through the process of discipline, how setting up rules was going to function, and how that was going to feel, and what that was going to look like. And so we decided that we would give domestic discipline a really fair try, and that we would start to incorporate rules and consequences into our relationship and go through that process for an entire month. We decided that we would kind of convene at the end of the month, just talk about what happened, how it felt, our perspective, and if this was something that we wanted to continue to do. That's not to say that, consent ends at that point. But it's to say that you want to build in times to check in, and you want to build in times to make sure that you're still on the same page, especially in the beginning. And so even after every punishment, Coda and I would check in. We would talk to each other. We would, how did that go? What did you think? Was there something that could have made that experience more successful? How are you feeling emotionally? How do you feel about continuing with the trial period and continuing with domestic discipline? Now, after that trial period, after we kind of said, yeah, we're kind of in this for the long haul, we stopped asking those questions of like, is this something you're still willing to do? Just because we had kind of had that preemptive conversation. Not to say that those concerns can't be brought up, but to say that you don't want to continually be bringing up like this idea of like, is this something you still want to do? Because at some point it feels like you're asking out of insecurity. You want to breed security in your relationship, and the way you do that is to kind of stand on your decisions, unless you really do have a reason to be bringing up that question, right? Just in the same sense that you don't go on a weekly date night and ask your spouse that if they're still willing to be married to you. You don't say, are you still okay with being in this relationship? That's not an ongoing conversation. You don't want to bring up like, are you still okay with domestic discipline all the time? That's just not something that you want to have being a question at the forefront. But be willing to have that conversation if something has happened that legitimately warrants the conversation. There are highs and lows in every relationship, and domestic discipline is no different. There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows, and you have to try to figure out, is this a commitment that you are willing to see through? And if it is, then you work with your partner and you do that together. And you do that because you want to. This really is something that you do because you want to be doing it. This really isn't something that you should be doing if you are doing it for someone else or for the sake of expectation, or you feel like you have to. I think it's really important that you have your own motivation for wanting domestic discipline. For me, I know that I thrive with boundaries. I know that I can be a more stable and more productive person when I have boundaries and consequences in place. And so that is motivating to me to want to continue this lifestyle, to want to continue to live within a domestic discipline relationship that has nothing to do with what Coda wants. That has nothing to do with having a motivation of like keeping him happy or keeping him, making sure that his needs are fulfilled. I do want those things. I do want to fulfill his needs. I do want to make sure that he is happy in our relationship as well. But I have to have a motivation that is just for me and just on my side of this, in order to say that this really is something that I want for myself outside of the consideration of my partner. So I think it's really important to do that so that you can say, yes, this is consensual because these are my reasons that are just for me. And that means that even if I didn't have my current partner, that I would be looking for someone who also shared the values of having this type of relationship. Coda and I have grown in our relationship to the point where we don't talk about the consensual aspect as much anymore, because that is such an ingrained part of our relationship. And it's something that we share such a value in together that it's not a focus anymore. And I think that sometimes you see that in resources where you talk about, the authority of the head of household and the submission of the taken in hand. And they don't really talk about the choice that they each made to be in those positions, because they've grown in their relationship kind of beyond that. But when you're first starting, that is something to consider, and you have to think about that aspect. So that is a really good question to ask. Is this really consensual? And the answer is that it is. It is really consensual for the vast majority of people that are participating in this relationship. I'm not going to sit here and say that there are not couples that use the language of domestic discipline and the titles of domestic discipline, and they misuse that to, create unhealthy relationships. I would argue that they are not participating in domestic discipline, really. They are going outside the boundaries of what that really means, but they're using the language to justify the unhealthy relationship that they've created. And so it can get confusing, especially when you don't necessarily know the difference and you don't have the experience and you're trying to figure it all out. And so I just want to encourage you that if this is something that you're looking into, if this is something that you are trying to figure out, know that this is your choice. And if this is something that you value, if this is something that you want, that is okay. That can be very, very good for you. It can be very healthy for you. There's nothing wrong with you if this is something that you want. And it is your choice. It is consensual, and no one can force you into accepting discipline if that is not something that you are willing to submit yourself to. And it is a choice to submit, and it is a choice to participate in domestic discipline. It is something that a lot of people find enriching, and it is something that a lot of people really do get a lot from participating in. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. I hope that you guys enjoyed that video. Again, if you have a question, leave it down below. I'd love to answer it, and we will talk to you next time.